Can loyalty change fate? A cop wrongfully convicted, facing death alone. But there's one thing he can't bear: being separated from his one true companion, his canine partner, Max. However, a terrifying truth is buried, and the only one who can save him is his dog. Does this story end as you think? What happens when loyalty rises above all? The answer may shock you. Find out now. Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. No more waiting. The story begins right now. The Los Angeles County Miami-Dade County Court was deathly silent. The magistrate's gavel came down hard, delivering the verdict that shattered John Carter's life. Guilty, a decorated officer with 15 years on the force, John sat handcuffed, staring at the floor. Despite his repeated claims of innocence, the jury had ruled against him. The evidence planted he was certain was enough to send him to prison. But the weight of the sentence wasn't what crushed him most. It was knowing he'd have to leave Max, his loyal canine partner, behind. Max sat near the back of the Los Angeles County Miami-Dade County Court, his sharp gaze locked on John. The German Shepherd had been more than a partner. He had been John's constant companion through life or death moments. Now, as John faced the lowest point of his life, the thought of never seeing Max again was unbearable. When the magistrate rose to leave, John's voice broke through the tense silence. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cracking, "before I'm taken away, I have one last request. Please let me say goodbye to Max." The Los Angeles County Miami-Dade County Court murmured in surprise. The magistrate stopped studying John for a long moment. Finally, he nodded, his voice firm but sympathetic. 3 minutes, he said. As soon as Max was released, the dog sprinted toward John, his claws clicking loudly on the floor. John dropped to his knees, pulling Max into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry, buddy," John whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I let you down." "I won't be there anymore," Max whimpered, nuzzling into John's chest. But then something changed. Max's body tensed, and his nose began to work frantically against John's jacket. He tugged at the fabric, barking sharply. The sudden sound broke the solemn stillness of the Los Angeles County Miami-Dade County Court, drawing every eye. "What's the dog doing?" the magistrate asked, frowning. Max pulled harder, his sharp barks echoing off the walls. One of the officers stepped forward cautiously and began to check John's jacket. The tension in the room became suffocating. Then, with a metallic clink, a small object fell to the floor. It was a recording device. The district attorney's face went pale. He stepped forward quickly, his voice shaky. "This doesn't prove anything," he snapped, trying to regain control of the moment. But Max barked again, his alert stance unyielding. The truth was clear. Whatever was on that device mattered. John stared at the small recorder, his heart pounding. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered. Could this be the proof he'd been waiting for? Did you feel the power of the bond between John and Max? Imagine what's still to come in this gripping and emotional story. If you want to find out what's on that recorder and how it could change everything, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. The next thrilling moment is just getting started. The Los Angeles County Miami-Dade County Court was frozen in stunned silence. The small recording device lay in the center of the floor, its metallic casing glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. Max remained rigid beside John, his piercing barks cutting through the room as if demanding someone pay attention. Every set of eyes turned to the object and the air became thick with tension. "Pick it up," the magistrate ordered, his voice low but firm. The officer closest to the device hesitated for a moment before bending down and scooping it into his hand. He held it up for all to see, confusion etched across his face. "What is this?" the magistrate asked sharply, directing his gaze toward the district attorney, who was already beginning to sweat. The district attorney cleared his throat, his face pale. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. It's not part of the evidence submitted during the trial," he stammered. "Clearly, it's been tampered with." "Tampered with?" the magistrate interrupted, his eyebrows knitting together. In a Los Angeles County Miami-Dade County Court, during sentencing, his voice carried a razor-sharp edge now, and The district attorney visibly flinched. "Officer, activate the device." The officer fumbled with the small recorder, his fingers trembling as he pressed the play button. A static-filled crackle filled the room, followed by muffled voices. Everyone leaned forward, straining to listen, and then the words hit like a bombshell. "Just plant the evidence," a gruff voice said. "Clear as day, no one's going to question it. Carter's clean record makes him the perfect scapegoat. Get it done." Gasps erupted across the room. John's heart stopped, then began pounding furiously. He knew that voice. It belonged to someone he had trusted, his former supervisor, Captain Brian Harding. "That's enough," the district attorney blurted, rushing toward the officer holding the recorder. But the magistrate slammed his gavel down. "Sit down," he barked, his tone so commanding that the district attorney froze mid-step. John couldn't believe what he was hearing. The damning recording revealed everything: how the evidence had been planted, how he had been framed. Max, still sitting calmly at John's side, let out a single low growl, as if echoing his partner's silent fury. The magistrate leaned back in his chair, his expression dark. "This trial is not over," he said firmly, addressing the room. "Bailiffs, escort the defendant back to holding. Officers, secure that device as new evidence. We're reopening this case." For the first time in weeks, John felt a spark of hope. As he was led away, Max watched him go, his intelligent eyes filled with unshakable loyalty. John turned back for one last look at his partner, silently promising himself and Max that he wouldn't let this injustice stand. Back in the cold holding cell, John sat on the hard bench, staring at the blank concrete wall. His mind raced with everything that had just happened. Max's sharp instincts had uncovered what no one else had: proof of a setup. That recording was his lifeline. But the revelation wasn't just a relief. It was a bet Briano. Captain Brian Harding, the man who had mentored him for years, was behind it. John clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. How deep did this go? Meanwhile, in the magistrate's chambers, tension ran high. The magistrate sat at his desk, replaying the recording on a secure device. The voices were unmistakable. Captain Harding's commanding tone, paired with another voice John didn't recognize, revealed a calculated conspiracy. The magistrate's eyes narrowed. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Summon Captain Harding to my office immediately," he said curtly. Outside the Los Angeles County Miami-Dade County Court, Harding had been waiting to ensure John's sentencing went smoothly, at least for his plan. But when the bailiff approached him with the magistrate's sudden summons, a flicker of unease crossed his face. He rose stiffly, adjusting his tie, and followed the officer down the hall. Inside the chambers, the magistrate's expression was unreadable as Harding entered. The captain offered a polite nod, but his shoulders were tense. "You called for me, Your Honor?" Harding asked, his voice steady, though his eyes flicked nervously toward the recording device on the desk. "I did," the magistrate replied, leaning forward. He tapped the recorder with his finger. "Care to explain this?" Harding's facade of confidence faltered for a split second, but he quickly masked it with confusion. "I'm not sure what you mean, Your Honor," he said evenly. The magistrate pressed play. Once again, the damning words filled the room. Harding's face drained of color, but he recovered quickly. "Your Honor, this is absurd," Harding said, forcing a chuckle. "That could be anyone. You can't seriously think." "I don't think," the magistrate interrupted, his voice hard. "I act on evidence, and this," he gestured to the recorder, "is evidence of a crime. Multiple crimes, in fact." "Bailiffs." Before Harding could respond, two bailiffs entered the room. Panic flashed in his eyes as they approached him. "What are you doing?" Harding demanded, his voice rising. "You can't. You're being detained for questioning," the magistrate said firmly. "Until we get to the bottom of this, you're a suspect in the obstruction of justice and falsifying evidence." As the Miami-Dade County Court officers led a protesting Harding away, the magistrate leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. The web of corruption was unraveling fast, and John Carter's story was far from over. The recording's discovery had thrown the entire department into turmoil. As Captain Harding was taken into custody, whispers of corruption spread like wildfire among the officers. Meanwhile, John sat in his holding cell, unaware of the storm brewing outside. His thoughts lingered on Max. The loyal K9 had been the one to uncover the device, and now John couldn't help but wonder. If Max could find that, what else could he expose? Elsewhere, Max was taken to the department's San Francisco Police Department K9 unit for evaluation. Officer Emily Mitchell, one of John's closest colleagues, had volunteered to look after the dog until the case was resolved. Max seemed restless, pacing in his kennel and occasionally letting out sharp barks that echoed through the otherwise quiet building. "He knows something's wrong," Emily muttered, watching him from outside the kennel. She crouched down, looking Max in the eyes. "Don't worry, buddy, we'll figure this out." But as Emily stood up, her gaze shifted to Max's nose, which was pressed against the gate, sniffing intently at her jacket. Her stomach churned. Was this behavior connected to John's case? Or was she imagining things? She hesitated for a moment before opening the kennel door. "All right, boy," she said, grabbing Max's leash. "Let's see if you're trying to tell us something." She brought Max to John's locker in the department storage room. The dog immediately began sniffing and pawing at the compartment. Emily's heart raced as she unlocked it and opened the door. Inside, beneath a few folded uniforms, was a small, unmarked envelope. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out and opened it. Inside were photographs, grainy but damning. They showed a man, clearly Captain Harding, meeting with a known criminal. A document tucked behind the photos outlined transactions that implicated Harding in a bribery scheme tied to the very case that had led to John's arrest. Emily stared at the evidence, her chest tightening. "Max," she whispered, her voice breaking, "you just found the smoking gun." Realizing the magnitude of what she held, Emily immediately contacted the magistrate's office. The photos and documents, combined with the recording Max had uncovered, painted a clear picture of Harding's guilt. But Emily knew this wasn't over. If Harding had orchestrated this setup, he likely hadn't done it alone. Max sat beside her, his steady presence grounding her as her mind raced. "John was right," she said softly, scratching behind Max's ears. "You really are the best partner anyone could ask for." Emily sat in the evidence room. The incriminating photos spread out on the desk before her, the weight of what she had uncovered pressed heavily on her chest. Captain Harding wasn't just a corrupt officer, he was part of something much larger. The documents Max had helped uncover outlined connections to other high-ranking officials, payments that couldn't be explained, and a disturbing trail of manipulation that reached far beyond John's case. She glanced down at Max, who sat alert beside her. His piercing eyes seemed to sense her unease. "This isn't just about John," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "This goes way deeper." Realizing the severity of the situation, Emily called the magistrate directly. Within an hour, the evidence she'd uncovered was in his hands. The magistrate's face darkened as he reviewed the documents and photos. "This is bigger than I thought," he admitted, his voice heavy. "If these documents are accurate, John Carter isn't just innocent. He's a victim of a department-wide cover-up." The magistrate immediately ordered an emergency hearing. News of the case reopening sent shockwaves through the precinct. Officers whispered in hallways, tensions rising as suspicions grew. Several officers who had testified against John began to squirm, knowing their involvement might come under scrutiny. Back in his cell, John was called out unexpectedly. The sudden commotion in the jail's holding area made his pulse quicken. He was escorted to a secure room where Emily was waiting with the magistrate. As soon as John saw the folder of evidence and Max sitting proudly by Emily's side, his heart swelled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "This just came in," the magistrate said, sliding the documents toward John. "It proves Harding's corruption and, most importantly, that the evidence used to convict you was fabricated." John's hands trembled as he flipped through the papers. The photos, the records, and even notes detailing how Harding had manipulated the case against him. It was all there. His voice cracked as he asked, "Does this mean?" The magistrate nodded firmly. "It means you're going free, but this isn't over yet. There are more people involved, and we're going to need your help to expose them." John knelt down, pulling Max into another embrace. "You saved me, boy," he whispered. "You saved me again." As Max wagged his tail, the relief in the room was palpable, but John knew this was just the beginning. Whoever had orchestrated this went deeper than Harding. There were more layers to uncover, and John wouldn't rest until the entire truth was brought to light. What do you think will happen next? Will John uncover the full truth behind this conspiracy? Share your thoughts in the comments. John stepped out of the Miami-Dade County Courthouse for the first time as a free man, but the weight of what lay ahead was far heavier than the shackles he had just shed. Reporters swarmed the steps, shouting questions about his release, the reopened case, and the corruption scandal brewing within the department. John ignored them, his focus solely on Max, who trotted faithfully at his side. The sight of his loyal canine partner brought a flicker of hope amid the chaos. Inside the Miami-Dade County Courthouse, the magistrate had convened a special task force to investigate the growing web of corruption. Emily, now an integral part of the team, was leading the charge. The photos, recordings, and financial records Max had helped uncover pointed to a sprawling network of bribery and evidence tampering involving multiple officers and even external players. Captain Harding was just the tip of the iceberg. "John," Emily said, catching up to him outside the Miami-Dade County Courthouse, "we need your help. No one knows this department better than you." John hesitated, his jaw tightening. He had spent his entire career trusting the badge, believing in the integrity of the system. Now that trust was shattered. But as he looked down at Max, the dog's calm, determined eyes reminded him of why he had joined the force in the first place. "I'm in," he finally said. "But I'm not doing this for the department. I'm doing it for the truth and for every officer who's still fighting for what's right." The investigation began in earnest. Emily and John worked tirelessly, piecing together timelines, cross-referencing cases, and interviewing officers who had worked closely with Harding. Some were willing to cooperate, but others stonewalled, their silence raising more suspicions. Max played a surprising role, sniffing out hidden files and leading them to overlooked evidence during searches of Harding's office and locker. One night, while sifting through a pile of old case files, Emily discovered a list of names, officers, local politicians, and known criminals linked to suspicious payments in unsolved crimes. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous the trail became. It was clear that this wasn't just about John's case. It was about an entire network of people who had used their power to cover up crimes and destroy anyone who stood in their way. "John," Emily said, her voice heavy with concern, "if we push this any further, we're going to make enemies. Dangerous ones." John looked up from the file he was studying. "We've already made them," he said, "but I'm not stopping. Not until the whole truth comes out." Max let out a soft bark as if in agreement. John reached down to scratch the dog behind the ears, his resolve hardening. They weren't just fighting for justice anymore. They were fighting for everyone who had been silenced, bet-brianed, or framed. The task force was working around the clock. Boxes of evidence filled every available desk in the small conference room that had become the investigation's headquarters. John, now officially cleared of all charges, had thrown himself into the work. The deeper they dug, the more twisted the web of corruption became. Bank statements, falsified police reports, and intercepted communications all pointed to a massive conspiracy that extended far beyond Captain Harding. Emily placed a thick folder in front of John, her expression grim. "We've identified at least 6 other officers who were in on this," she said. "Some of them are high-ranking, and it gets worse. There's evidence tying them to organized crime." John leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. These weren't just rogue officers breaking the rules for personal gain. This was an orchestrated operation, blending corruption within the department with criminal enterprises outside of it. "If this is as big as it looks, we can't handle this alone," he said. "We need to take this federal." But Emily shook her head. "Not yet. We're still missing key pieces. If we take this to the FBI now and they leak it, the whole operation could scatter. We need something definitive, something that locks these people in place." Their conversation was interrupted by Max, who suddenly stood up from where he had been lying by John's feet. The dog's ears perked as he trotted toward the door, sniffing the air. John frowned. "What is it, boy?" he asked, following Max. Max led John to the far side of the conference room, where a stack of old case files sat in disarray. Emily followed, watching as Max began to paw at one particular box. John opened it, his heart pounding. Inside were files from a case closed 5 years ago, a drug bust that had supposedly resulted in a clean sweep of arrests. But as John flipped through the documents, he noticed glaring inconsistencies. Names had been erased, and some sections of the reports were blacked out. "This doesn't make sense," John muttered. These aren't standard redactions. Someone doctored these files. Emily leaned over his shoulder. "And look at this," she said, pointing to a handwritten note at the bottom of one report. It was a signature Captain Harding's. The drug bust had been the perfect cover, but the evidence in the box suggested that the operation had been a smokescreen to eliminate rivals in the drug trade while shielding certain criminals who were paying off the department. John clenched his fists. "They were playing both sides," he said, anger lacing his voice, "and they ruined good officers' lives to do it." As they continued sifting through the files, John's phone buzzed. It was a text from an anonymous number. "You're digging too deep. Stop or you'll regret it." He stared at the screen for a moment before showing Emily. She looked up at him, her face pale but determined. "They're scared," she said. "That means we're getting close." John glanced at Max, who sat calmly by his side as if ready for whatever came next. "Let them come," he said. "We're not stopping now." John stared at the text on his phone. "You're digging too deep. Stop or you'll regret it." The message sent a chill through him. It wasn't just a vague warning, it was a direct threat. He showed it to Emily, who leaned over the desk, her expression grim. "This isn't random," she said quietly. "They know exactly what we're working on. They've been watching us." Her words hung heavy in the air, the weight of their situation settling in. As the rest of the team left for the night, John and Emily stayed behind, determined to uncover the missing piece of the puzzle. Max lay by John's feet, his ears occasionally twitching as he rested. "We're close, but we're still missing the key," Emily said, sifting through the files. She pointed to a document John hadn't noticed before. "Look at this. Every major bribe and erased report ties back to one name, the whistleblower. They're the one pulling the strings." John's eyes narrowed as he stared at the initials. "The whistleblower," he muttered. "They've stayed hidden this long, but if we find them, this whole operation crumbles." Suddenly, Max stood up, his body tense, his ears flicked forward, and he let out a low growl. John looked down at him, alarmed. "What is it?" he asked. But before Emily could answer, the lights in the conference room flickered and then went out completely. The room was plunged into darkness. Emily froze, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. "That's not a power outage," she said, her voice low and steady. The sound of breaking glass shattered the silence, followed by the unmistakable thud of footsteps outside the door. John's heart raced as adrenaline surged through his veins. He motioned for Emily to take cover. "We're not alone," he whispered. Max crouched low, his growl deepening, his sharp eyes fixed on the doorway. Whoever had sent the text wasn't bluffing. They had come to stop the investigation. The footsteps grew louder, inching closer. John gripped his weapon tightly, his mind racing through the possibilities. "Stay close, Max," he whispered. Emily locked eyes with him, her expression resolute. "Whatever happens," she said, "we don't let them win." As the door creaked open, Max leapt forward, his instincts sharp and ready. John steadied his aim, prepared for whatever was about to come through that door. They were under attack, and the fight to expose the truth had just turned deadly. The door burst open and chaos erupted in an instant. A shadowed figure stepped into the room, their weapon drawn. Before they could react, Max lunged with incredible speed, clamping his jaws onto the intruder's arm. The man let out a guttural scream, dropping his weapon as he tried to shake the dog off. John didn't hesitate. He swept the gun away with his foot and trained his own weapon on the second figure now rushing through the doorway. "Don't move," John shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The second intruder froze, their hands raised, but the tension in their stance told him they were waiting for an opportunity to strike. Behind him, Emily had taken cover and was calling for backup on her radio, her voice steady but urgent. Max held firm on the first man, growling low as the intruder struggled. "Call him off," the man yelled in panic. John stepped forward, his gun steady. "Call them off first." He shot back, motioning toward the others outside. He could hear more footsteps echoing in the hall, heavy and deliberate. Whoever these people were, they hadn't come to negotiate. The man didn't respond, but before John could press further, another deafening sound filled the air. Tear gas canisters being thrown into the room. Thick, acrid smoke began to fill the space, stinging their eyes and throats. "We're out of time," Emily yelled, grabbing the files they'd been working on. "We need to move," John whistled sharply, and Max immediately released his grip on the man's arm, retreating back to John's side. The team moved quickly, ducking low to avoid the bomb as they pushed toward the emergency exit at the back of the room. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets pinging off walls and furniture. John could feel his pulse pounding in his ears as he covered Emily and Max, firing back to slow their pursuers. Bursting through the exit, they found themselves in the dark alley behind the building. Emily clutched the files to her chest, gasping for air. "We can't go back to the precinct," she said between breaths. "They've compromised everything. They'll be waiting for us." John nodded, his mind racing. Whoever the whistleblower was, they were playing for keeps. But as he looked down at Max, who stood at his side, panting but unshaken, John felt a surge of resolve. "Then we finish this on our terms," he said. "We're not running anymore." The safe house was eerily quiet. John, Emily, and Max had retreated there after narrowly escaping the attack at the precinct. The small cabin, hidden deep in the woods, was their last refuge. Spread across the wooden table in front of them were the files Emily had managed to save. They contained everything they needed to expose the network: transaction records, names and ties to the whistleblower, the shadowy figure who had orchestrated everything. Emily flipped through the files, her fingers trembling slightly. "This is it," she said. "If we can get this to the press or federal investigators, they won't be able to cover it up. The entire operation will crumble." John nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the scanning the tree lean. He knew it wasn't over. Whoever had attacked them wouldn't stop until they were silenced. Suddenly, Max's ears perked, and he let out a low growl, his body tensing. John froze his hand instinctively, reaching for his weapon. "They found us," he whispered. Emily looked up, her face pale, but determined. "How we've been careful." John shook his head. "It doesn't matter. They're here." The first shot shattered the stillness, breaking through the cabin's window. Glass sprinted across the room as John shoved Emily behind the table for cover. Max barked furiously, standing his ground at John's side. More shots rang out, the attackers closing in. John took a deep breath, adrenaline flooding his veins. "Stay down," he told Emily. "Max and I will hold them off." He and Max moved in perfect sync. As the attackers breached the front door, John fired, taking out one of the intruders. Max lunged at another, his powerful jaws bringing the man to the ground. But the attackers kept coming. Emily crawled toward the files, grabbing the most important documents and stuffing them into a bag. "John," she shouted over the gunfire, "we need to get these out of here now." John nodded, his face grim. "Go. Max and I will cover you." Emily hesitated for a split second before slipping out the back door, disappearing into the darkness with the evidence in hand. John and Max held their ground, pushing back the attackers with every ounce of strength they had. Just as the last intruder fell, sirens echoed in distance. Backup had finally arrived. Days later, the story broke nationwide. Emily had delivered the files to a trusted journalist, and the resulting expose brought the entire network crashing down. Arrests were made at every level, from corrupt officers to the whistleblower himself, revealed to be a powerful local politician who had been using the Chicago Police Department as his personal enforcers. John was hailed as a hero, though he brushed off the attention. Standing on the porch of his home, he watched Max play in the yard. The loyal dog had saved him more times than he could count, and their bond had grown unbreakable. "We did it, boy," John said softly, kneeling to scratch behind Max's ears. "It's over." Max wagged his tail, leaning into John's touch, his sharp eyes calm for the first time in weeks. For John, it wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the start of something new. The story of John Carter and his canine partner Max is not just a legal journey, but a living testament to the power of loyalty, friendship, and justice. There were moments when the truth seemed buried beneath clever schemes, when hope appeared to be all but lost. Yet, in that defining moment, it was loyalty and persistence that lifted the dark veil, bringing light to the truth. This story reminds us that even in the most difficult times, we can still find the faith and strength to fight for what's right. John and Max have overcome tremendous challenges, but their journey doesn't stop here. Their story continues, and we can't help but look forward to the deeper secrets they will uncover next. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on more inspiring and captivating videos. Let's share these heartfelt stories together, spreading the message of justice, loyalty, and hope. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we look forward to seeing you in the next powerful story.